And so I have, the first title is what my husband calls the old geezer title. So I was at Clemson University for 22 years, and so I am part of their emeritus college. So every time we get a piece of mail from them, I get informed that the old geezers have contacted you. So thank you, dear. And then the second faculty position that I now hold is at the University of Georgia. And I actually just moved to Georgia about 3 weeks ago from Kansas State University, where I was serving as the Dr. Prairie of Kansas State University. So I served as the Vice President for Research and had a fantastic time helping others, learning a lot about sorghum and learning a lot about agricultural issues and things that I had never heard about in my biomedical career. So I'm excited to be back working in the area of biomedicine. And I wanted to share a little bit about my story in the sense of innovation and collaboration. And so I have a line that if you have worked with me and one of my students, I know it by heart, and that is that innovation lies at the boundaries of disciplines. And so I'm a big fan of working with people that don't look like me, that don't sound like me, that don't think like me, because that's where I learn the most. And so this idea of different perspectives coming together, and I would claim that invention comes from that too, stems from being in such an environment and such a space. And underlying that, in my mind, is collaboration, because you can't experience that intersection without collaborating with a variety of other types of individuals. And so my story starts in Clemson, South Carolina. And so again, I moved from Kansas, so I'm getting used to the trees. I've been hugging trees for the last few days. But it was a beautiful place where I spent about 6 years as a graduate student, completing a master's degree and a PhD. And I worked for an individual who was very different. He had actually just arrived at Clemson before I arrived. And again, he didn't look like me, didn't sound like me. He was Egyptian, older gentleman. He came from industry, so that was even more odd, not just to me, but for everybody in an academic environment. They thought that was very peculiar. And quite frankly, some people were not fans of that, thought this was not the way one should do business. One should be brought up through the ranks of academia, not hired from industry. But for me and for the students that were fortunate enough to work with him, it was a fantastic opportunity because he brought such a very different perspective on so many levels. And he cared about students. He was a mentor. And he really, really saw the potential in all of us and saw us as individuals and loved the fact that he had a very diverse set of individuals and perspectives, and really worked to make us a team and respect one another as individuals, and also respect the fact that we could work together in a very productive manner as a team. And so I worked with him for 6 years, and it was fantastic. And if you look, he came from Johnson & Johnson, specifically Ethicon, and so that's the suture-making division. And so if you look in the patent literature, you'll see hundreds, almost, I believe, over 300 patents to his name. And he was the head of the suture division, specifically interested in developing degradable sutures. So for those of you who've ever had a cut or you've had to have stitching material, and it's material that you don't have to go back and have removed, that gentleman is probably responsible for that existing. So he was an incredibly, incredibly innovative person. And when you met with him, a meeting was like no other, because he was focused on you, and you knew that. He was focused on the issues, but he was also thinking, you can almost see the thought bubble over his head, because he was thinking about the next innovation. And I claimed he was always looking around the room trying to think of what he could make degradable and patent. And so it was an amazing experience just to watch him. I mean, it was as much what he said as what he did. And he was inspiring, absolutely inspiring to all of us. Shalaby. And he was actually in Reader's Digest because his name was Shalaby. He worked at Johnson & Johnson, and he lived in New York, and he had PhD. And I don't think any of that was done, on purpose to make that happen, but it pretty much described him to a T, because he was a fascinatingly unique man that matched that profile.
And he had a patent?
Yeah, he had patent many times over. So it was a fantastic thing, but the downside to this was we were so mesmerized by him that, at the end of your time, your graduate school career, you have to leave. And so when I got to the end of my graduate school career, I didn't know what to do. I said, what the heck? I've been looking at this man, and this man has always been telling us, leading us to these great ideas. And we've been excited and so caught up in the great ideas that most of us didn't think about, how are we going to come up with great ideas of our own? And so this was very distressing, as exciting as it was. And so this is what it did to me. It made me turn into looking like this. It was a photo of me stressing out, saying, who am I? And as I thought about it, I thought, and I had some friends in other labs that were, they were applying for faculty positions and successfully getting those, and they knew exactly what they wanted to do in life, and they felt like they had ideas. I didn't feel like I had a single original idea in my head, and it might have been because the bar was so high. I mean, I worked with such a creative individual that I didn't see any idea coming out of my head as matching that, and therefore, I couldn't possibly apply for a faculty position, and wasn't even sure I could apply for something in industry. And so as I thought about it, I thought, postdoc, I shall hide. I shall hide for a few more years, and really then it'll come to me in a vision in the middle of the night, all these great ideas. Let me do that. And so I actually did sign on to a postdoctoral career. And, as I was reflecting back on, okay, well, I still have to have some ideas coming in because I'm moving up in the area of independence. I had worked for Dr. Chalabi in the area of fracture fixation. So if you've ever broken a bone, it may have been mended back together by applying a plate or a pin or a screw. Not dissimilar to going to Home Depot in the hardware area. Those are exactly the type of devices that biomedical engineers use. In Dr. Chalabi's world, these were absorbable. And so I had been trained in the area of absorbable materials. And so I said, I know bone pins. I can make different kinds of bone pins, and that was as far as the creativity went, and I can make, the equivalent of green ones or pink ones or something else. And again, I thought, that's really not too creative, and the picture became even worse, and I started looking even more confused and upset. And I thought, all right, this is not going too well. So I signed on, because of all this, I signed on to a different area, because I thought, well, maybe that will help. And I've been trained, the other interesting thing about Dr. Chalabi, of many, was that he was a chemist. And yet I was in an engineering environment that was, yes, yay, Dr. McCrary's cheering in the back of the room for chemists, go chemists. And it was headed by a veterinarian, the department was. But yet we were in the College of Engineering. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, how wonderfully eclectic this was. I just thought this was normal, this is just what a department looks like and what a college looks like. And so I thought, well, the thing that was missing in my simple mind was human medicine and working in a clinical environment where I could interface with patients. And so for that reason, I signed on at a hospital, a medical center in Charlotte, North Carolina, and started working for a breast cancer surgeon. And so there again, I had to start thinking, the surgeon was very excited. He had many biologists on board, and he had many clinicians on board, big staff, but all clinically focused. And he did not have any engineers or materials people or chemists on board. And so he really was so enthusiastic. Well, I think that enthusiasm made me a little afraid because I started thinking, well, the expectations are so high. Because, what I saw was someone that thought I'd be able to solve world peace and a few other things. We were hiring an engineer. And so I misinterpreted, to be perfectly honest, the enthusiasm. But yet there's this pressure building up in my head, and so I started thinking, okay, what can I do here? And at the time, tissue engineering was sort of becoming more the norm in biomedical engineering departments across the country. There weren't any companies at the time. Well, there were a couple of fledgling companies that eventually went out of business at the time. But the idea was that you could create a biological replacement in breast tissue engineering, for example, for a woman who'd had a mastectomy or a lumpectomy, so they'd had tissue removed, breast tissue removed, and you would replace the tissue, so you have a defect, you would replace it with normal healthy cells taken from the patient, combined with a degradable material. And that was something that I knew a little something about. However, at the time, state of the art was this. So the picture on the right bottom side is an actual plastic material that was state of the art at the time, and it's porous. It's been built so that it has holes in it. And I liken it to a Swiss cheese. If you think of a block of Swiss cheese, that's sort of describes what this looked like. And that was really exciting at the time. And in hindsight, that's kind of horrifying. And so as I started thinking about it, I decided, it would make more sense, because everything I had studied about tissue engineering truly was studying it on paper. I thought it would make more sense, given that I was at a hospital, to be able to look in the clinic and actually shadow my surgeon, my mentor. And so I asked him if that would be okay, and he said, absolutely, that would be great. And so what I found was not only the things I was able to read about in the paper, you have a square or a cube that you're implanting in somebody, but how does that conform to a defect? And then cells, do they really want to be in the middle of something, that's a block of material? How are they going to relate to cells in the body? How they're going to get their food? How is their waste going to be transported? It just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And not only that, it required a scalpel, an incision. And so we've taken a woman who has very serious health issues, and we've exacerbated the problem because now we have a very invasive surgery. And so I was able to see that working with the patients and also talking with clinicians and talking with my mentor, the surgeon, and so there has to be a better way than this. And so that led me to the prairie dog moment, which after a day of this, I had some downtime, which happened to match, which is very rare in the life of a surgeon, some free time that my surgeon mentor had. And so I asked him some questions in the hallway and, said, how do you typically, is there any other way that you implant these and, under what circumstances? And so he just started to describe things, and I'm very visual, and so he would describe things, and I would not follow what he was describing. And then he would describe a little more, thinking he was being helpful, and again, I would look at him like he was a Martian and not understand what he was talking about. And he finally said, look, there's a room, a storage room that we have where we send the excess equipment or equipment that, oops, I accidentally ordered that, or, well, this was not at all what I intended to order. Let's go and take a look, and let's talk about it. And so enter and it's really not much of an over-dramatization of a messy storage room at a hospital. I would say this is quite typical. And so we went into the room, and it really did look somewhat like this, except that it was probably even worse because it had big piles of boxes on the floor as well, and it was just littered with things as though people just, fired things into the room at will. And so we sat down in there and started tearing into boxes. I mean, truly, we were ripping into boxes and looking at things. And Walter was sitting on one side of the room, and I was sitting on the other side of the room, so we couldn't actually see one another. We had boxes in between, and we were discussing as we went along a little bit of everything. And so we'd rip into something, and he would show me something. He'd say, oh, yeah, this is what I was telling you about, blah, blah, blah. And whether it was a syringe or whether it was a surgical tool, where it was a stethoscope. Some of the conversation was good, some of it was fairly useless. I claim we talked about even some flying pigs, and then you have to recognize that it's a brainstorming opportunity, and not everything is going to be valuable, but you have to let it flow. And so we were probably in there an hour or so, looking at these things, and as he would show me something, I would say, oh, we could modify that, blah, 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 and then I'd start describing in my head. And I got more and more excited and more relaxed about, this stress of worrying about what am I going to do had been taken over by the fact that it was such a fascinating conversation. I was visually able to connect with the problem and the potential solutions. And so at one point I said, well, I think we could also change what we're implanting as well, and we might be able to use some of the things that are actually available. Because he'd also described, the process if we did pick something and we modified it, here's what we would have to do. And so anyway, I described this to him, and we were, again, sitting behind these boxes, and he pops up behind his box, and the vision in my mind was it was like a prairie dog flying out of a prairie dog hole to bellow across the room, I love engineers. And it was hilarious because he's a man of large stature and a very low voice, and it just filled, his presence and his voice permeated the room. And I'm sitting there excited about this particular discussion that we've had, and it suddenly clicked that, I love engineers meant I was a part of his group, and he was a part of my group. We were a part of a team. And for me to think that everything, fell on my shoulders and I needed to have a magic wand was fairly arrogant on my part. And that we each had shards of information, and together it was very powerful information, but independently it was shards of information. And that was such an amazing moment for me that it got named the Prairie Dog moment because of the popping up and down from behind the boxes. So that then became the underlying theme, and as I continued my postdoc fellowship, I sought out opportunities, And my mentor allowed me to and promoted that, and so I actually was able to work with orthopedic surgeons and a wide variety of individuals in order to have that collaboration and that intersection at the boundaries of disciplines. The innovation of the Prairie Dog moment, the specific one, was an injectable tissue system. So as I said, we'd had a lot of discussion about ways of implanting materials, but we've been thinking about the traditional materials. And so what the discussion in the room had evolved to was, could we change what was actually implanted? And so the idea was that we could make degradable beads that could be ejected from a catheter or from a syringe, already existing technologies. They would be degradable. They could be combined with cells from a patient, and at the time we were focused on fat cells, because most people, quite frankly, are not too upset when you say, can we take a few fat cells? Normal healthy ones from a patient, and then we could design the beads, and so this goes back to my idea of, I can make a red, blue, green bone pin. Well, there wasn't a good reason for that. Now there's a good reason. Because, for example, all the A's could be releasing an anti-cancer drug. All the B's might be longer-lasting beads. So you could really customize and personalize an implant to a patient. So then it would be combined with a carrier gel, which is degradable as well, and then loaded into a syringe or a catheter and injected into a defect. And the advantage, as opposed to our Swiss cheese model, one, it's customizable, easy to deliver, minimally invasive to a patient, and degradable, breaks down, and a natural material, and deforms to a defect as well. And so that was the Prairie Dog moment that then led to many things over the course of years. Currently, we've actually leveraged, everything's built on the previous technology, and so the current innovation that's built upon that is this idea of diagnostics. So ideally, we'd like to be able to prevent the disease rather than always be repairing after the disease. And so we can use the same concept of combining cells from a patient with a material scaffold that we've designed, and then either observing behavior to be able to make a good clinical decision, or we can test, for example, anti-cancer drugs on that particular cellular material construct so that we're not testing those drugs on a patient. And then another form of that is actually using fiber technology. So most of us, and you're a good example because you're dressed in athletic apparel, you probably have fibers in your shirt that are like this. Most of us, if it's not athletic apparel, we have fibers that have a round cross-section. And so what you have on probably has channeled fibers, ones that aren't round. And what that does is it allows moisture to be pulled away from the body so that you have evaporative cooling and you feel cooler when you work out. So if you go for a run, you would feel cooler than if you were wearing a cotton shirt that had round fibers on. And so we decided to use that technology and said, what if we had a blood sample? We wanted to be able to diagnose a cancer patient and decide what stage or if they had cancer. And we'd like to catch it at a very, very early stage before it becomes an issue. Could we use the fibers for the same thing? The idea being that you can actually separate cells using that. So you have a mixture of different cell types, and the fibers have been designed for athletic performance and moving liquid, so now we can move liquid in the form of blood and cells, and because cells have different properties, they move to different degrees, and so we could get a diagnosis on that. So we actually were able to spin out a company. Two of my former students did that. They had business degrees as well and thought this was very exciting to spin out a company, and so there's a company that is doing diagnoses as opposed to the more high-risk, high-investment work of getting a tissue-engineered replacement through the FDA approval and so forth. That's the longer-term ambition. In the meantime, the diagnostic one being able to catch the cancer faster on the front end and hopefully diminish or if not eliminate the need for the repair technologies. The original Prairie Dog moment led to many fantastic things, including the technology that I just told you about. We did, back at that time, submit a proposal to the National Science Foundation, which was funded and then resulted in a visit to the White House to meet the president, and which was an amazing opportunity and an honorific moment, but it by no means is what the impact of the technology really was. The impact of the technology were people that you see in the pictures there. Over 50 graduate students worked with that original idea of an injectable material. We had over 40 undergraduates over time on that project. There were so many angles, so many things to look at. Hundreds of K-12 students and teachers. We worked with many, many different programs to expose teachers and K-12 students to biomedical ideas and to learn from them about communication and how we can better integrate ideas, research ideas from universities into classroom settings as well to benefit all. And then probably the most exciting thing to me was we worked with over 12 disciplines on that very first initial project, everything from business individuals to computer scientists, material scientists, chemists, you heard that right, chemists? To biomedical engineers, electrical engineers, environmental engineers, and the list went on and on. We worked with artists as well. And to me, that was tremendously exciting because what it did, I would love it if everyone decided they wanted to be a biomedical engineer, but what it did was it exposed those individuals to a little bit bigger a piece of the landscape in their own field to see, hey, this is something, to which I could contribute. I don't have to be a biomedical engineer to contribute to that particular area. So I urge everyone to celebrate the Prairie Dog moments. They are wonderful. I think I go out of my way to attempt to find them at this point in time. And I am at the University of Georgia, and you might think that I'm in the engineering department or the engineering college. I am not. I'm actually located in the College of Veterinary Medicine. And this is how I go to work every day, very excited, and I hope the clinician I'm at least claiming they look excited to see me too. But that's really the key, is to be around those individuals. They have a very different perspective from me, and it's the collision of those ideas, the integration of those ideas that is the key to innovation. So again, innovation and invention lies at the boundaries of disciplines, and collaboration underlies and is the fundamental foundation building block for that. So a big thank you for inviting us to be here. It's fantastic. It's the first time I've been on campus. Very impressive place, and very appreciative of the opportunity. Thank you.